Emma Parker vanished on a warm summer afternoon, leaving behind only a toppled bicycle, a toy unicorn, and a mystery that would grip the quiet town of Willow Creek in fear. Carl Denson, the man no one really noticed, was already deep in the woods by then, certain he had outsmarted everyone. What didn't he know was that a small pink watch on a 6-year-old's wrist was silently betraying him, setting in motion a desperate race between a kidnapper's cunning and the relentless pursuit of justice. The afternoon sun hung low over Willow Creek, casting long shadows across the quiet neighborhood. It was the kind of small town where everyone knew each other's routines, where front doors often stayed unlocked, and children played freely in the streets. That is why no one thought twice when 6-year-old Emma Parker was seen riding her pink bicycle up and down Maple Lane that day. Her laughter echoed softly, the sound of a carefree summer. Her mother, Laura, watched from the porch as she chatted on the phone with her sister. It was just another ordinary day. Until it wasn't. When Laura went inside for a moment to grab a drink, she left the front door open. It couldn't have been more than 5 minutes. But when she came back outside, the yard was still. Emma's bike lay tipped over near the fence. Her favorite toy unicorn sat face down in the grass. The gate that always stayed closed was standing wide open. At first, Laura thought Emma had gone to visit the neighbors. She called her name, walked up and down the block, checked the park at the corner. With each unanswered call, her heart began to pound harder. Within an hour, the police arrived. Officers went door to door, asking if anyone had seen the little girl with the red ribbon in her hair. Neighbors joined the search, their flashlights sweeping the bushes as dusk crept in. Dogs barked, reporters began to gather, and panic settled over the town like a heavy fog. No one could understand how something like this could happen here. Parents clutched their children a little tighter, glancing at every passing car. Detectives from the county sheriff's office quickly took over. They collected Emma's toys, photographed the yard, and examined the gate latch. It wasn't broken, just opened. They found a faint shoe print in the dirt, too large to belong to a child. A nearby security camera from a grocery store captured something crucial, a dark van speeding down the road around the time Emma vanished. The image was grainy and hard to make out, but it was something. The police released the photo that night, asking for tips. News of the kidnapping spread fast. The story dominated the local channels, and soon national networks picked it up. Strangers online shared Emma's photo everywhere. Volunteers searched fields, rivers, and abandoned buildings. Helicopters hovered over forests, their spotlights slicing through the trees. Every hour that passed without new information deepened the dread. Back at the Parker home, detectives set up a temporary base. Maps covered the dining table, pins marking places they had already searched. They interviewed everyone who might have seen anything: delivery drivers, construction workers, and even the mail carrier. Still, no one had noticed the van closely enough to describe the driver. It was as if he had appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. In those early days, small details became huge. The detectives discovered that Emma had been wearing a watch, a bright pink one her grandfather had given her for her birthday. They noted it in their report but didn't think much of it then. Their focus remained on the van, the footprint, and any possible witnesses. Meanwhile, Laura barely slept. She sat on the porch night after night, hoping to hear the sound of her daughter's laughter again. As the days dragged on, hope started to fade. The search radius expanded beyond town limits into rural areas where thick woods and dirt roads made it easy for someone to hide. Investigators feared the worst but refused to give up. They followed every lead, even the unlikely ones. The sheriff publicly promised that they would find Emma no matter how long it took. The community clung to that promise. Candlelight vigils were held at the town square. Children placed drawings of unicorns and hearts on the Parker family's front door. But deep down, everyone knew that the longer Emma stayed missing, the harder it would be to bring her home. What no one realized was that she wasn't far away at all. Hidden deep in the woods, a small cabin stood silent, and inside, a frightened little girl waited for someone to find her. The cabin sat in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by thick pine trees that blocked out most of the sunlight. The air inside was damp and smelled of old wood and dust. There was no electricity, no running water, and only one small window covered with cardboard. It was the kind of place no one would ever stumble upon by accident. In that forgotten corner of the woods, Emma Parker was kept hidden from the world. She was scared and confused, not understanding why she had been taken or where she was. The heavy chain around her wrist clinked softly whenever she moved, and the sound filled the silence like an echo of fear. The man who had taken her, Carl Denson, had chosen this place carefully. He had found the abandoned cabin months earlier while moving through the forest looking for scrap metal and supplies. It was old but solid enough to live in. He patched the holes in the roof, brought in a mattress, and built a padlock onto the door. To anyone who might have passed by, it looked like an empty shack, but Carl saw it as the perfect hiding spot. He didn't trust people, didn't use phones, and avoided towns unless he needed to buy food. He survived on cash jobs and rarely spoke to anyone. His name didn't appear on any recent records, and most people didn't even know he existed. When he took Emma, Carl believed he had thought of everything. He covered his tracks, wiped his fingerprints, and used a stolen van that couldn't be traced back to him. He stayed off main roads and drove through back routes known only to hunters and farmers. By the time the news of Emma's disappearance reached the radio, he was already deep in the forest. He felt confident, almost proud of his cleverness. He believed the police would never find him. The cabin became Emma's world. Days blurred together as sunlight faded in through the cracks between the boards. She tried to count them, using the faint glow to keep track of time. Sometimes she could hear birds outside or the wind rustling through the trees, small reminders of the life she had lost. Carl rarely spoke to her, and when he did, his voice was cold and distant. He brought her food, mostly canned soup and crackers, and water from a nearby stream. He never let her see where he went during the day. Each time he left, he locked the door from the outside. Back in Willow Creek, detectives were working around the clock. They were studying maps, comparing witness statements, and trying to track the stolen van. One investigator noticed something strange while going through the reports. Emma's mother had mentioned that her daughter's watch could play music. The officer remembered reading about a new model that came with a small built-in tracker. It wasn't meant for emergencies, but it could send out short signals when near certain cell towers. It was a long shot, but the team decided to contact the manufacturer. While Carl rested in the cabin, the first faint signal appeared on the police monitor. It was weak and inconsistent, flickering in and out, but it was there. They couldn't pinpoint a location yet, but it gave them hope. Every time the watch sent a signal, they marked it. The dots formed a rough pattern that seemed to lead north, toward a dense stretch of woodland. Unaware of the danger closing in, Carl began to grow restless. The food he brought was running low, and he worried someone might have seen the van near the highway. He spent long hours listening to the radio he kept in the corner, trying to make sure his name hadn't been mentioned. When he heard the latest news report say that police were still searching the town, he relaxed, believing his plan had worked. At night, the woods outside grew colder. Emma lay awake, holding onto the edge of the blanket he had given her, whispering quietly to herself for comfort. She didn't know that the small pink watch still on her wrist was silently reaching out for help. Each flicker of its weak signal was guiding the search team closer to her hidden prison. And while Carl Denson slept, convinced he was invisible, the circle around him began to tighten. The morning the police first picked up the smoke, the forest was still and quiet, with a thin layer of mist hanging over the trees. A hunter named David Lane had been walking a familiar trail, his boots crunching against fallen leaves, when he noticed a thin gray column rising in the distance. It was faint but steady, not like the scattered smoke from a campfire. He knew the woods well and was certain no one lived in that area. The land was owned by the county and had been abandoned for decades. He hesitated at first, thinking it might be from hikers, but something about it felt off. He decided to report it to the local sheriff's office, unsure if it meant anything at all. That call changed everything. Within hours, a small search team gathered at the edge of the forest. They followed the rough coordinates the hunter had provided, moving cautiously through uneven ground. The deeper they went, the darker it became. The trees grew taller and closer together, blocking most of the light. The air smelled of pine and damp soil. The team moved in silence, careful not to give away their presence in case the smoke was connected to something dangerous. Each officer carried a flashlight, their beams cutting through the haze as they followed the faint trail. After nearly 3 hours of hiking, one of them spotted a small clearing. Through the gaps in the branches, they saw it, an old cabin made of rotting wood and rusted metal sheets. The windows were covered with cardboard, and a crude chimney puffed out slow, lazy smoke. It looked deserted from a distance, but something about the place felt wrong. The group stopped, their radios quiet except for the faint crackle of static. They signaled to one another and split into two sides, circling the building carefully. As they drew closer, they noticed deep footprints in the mud around the door. Some were fresh, the handle had been reinforced with a heavy padlock. No one could see inside, but then, from within the silence, came a faint sound, a soft clinking, like metal brushing against metal. The lead officer froze, motioning for the others to stop. They listened. The sound came again, slow and weak, as if someone was moving carefully but couldn't go far. The officer crept up to the small gap near the window and peered through. His breath caught. In the dim light, he could just make out a small figure sitting on the floor, her back against the wall. Her hair was tangled, her face pale. Around one wrist, a metal cuff glimmered faintly. It was a child. He signaled the others, and the team moved quickly but quietly. One officer took out bolt cutters while another radioed for backup. The silence broke as the padlock snapped open. The door creaked loudly as they pushed it in. The moment they stepped inside, the smell of smoke and mildew hit them. A small fire burned weakly in a metal can, the source of the smoke seen from afar. The girl looked up, her eyes wide and terrified. She didn't move at first, unsure if the people at the door were there to help or hurt her. An officer approached carefully, speaking softly as he unfastened the chain around her wrist. She was trembling but alive. They carried her outside, wrapping her in a jacket as she clung tightly to the nearest officer. Once Emma was safe in the arms of the rescue team, the officers turned back to the cabin. There was no one else inside. A small bed, a few cans of food, and a radio sat on a makeshift table. They found children's drawings torn into pieces, a worn backpack, and a few tools. The air was heavy with the feeling that someone had just left. The team radioed the discovery back to headquarters, confirming that the missing girl from Willow Creek had been found alive. Word spread quickly through the department, and within minutes, the sheriff was on his way to the scene. As paramedics tended to Emma at the edge of the forest, another officer noticed a set of fresh tire tracks leading away from the clearing. They were deep and recent, still wet from the morning dew. It meant Carl Denson had escaped just before they arrived. The rescue that should have ended the nightmare instead sparked a new race, one to catch the man who had vanished into the trees. Emma was safe, but the hunt was only beginning. The news of Emma's rescue spread through the police radio like wildfire. Officers cheered for a moment, relief washing over them, but it didn't last. The man who had taken her was still out there, and now he knew the police were close. Carl Denson had vanished into the woods before the team reached the cabin. His van was gone, his few belongings left behind. Every officer on duty was called to join the manhunt. They couldn't risk him slipping away again. As the rescue team escorted Emma to safety, other units fanned out across the forest, searching every trail and dirt road. Helicopters circled above, their lights cutting through the early morning fog. The woods were dense, making it easy for someone to hide, but there were only so many paths wide enough for a van. The officers followed the fresh tire tracks spotted near the clearing, hoping they would lead to him before he made it out to the main roads. Carl drove fast, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had seen the flashing lights through the trees when he was returning from a nearby stream. The realization had hit him hard. The police had found the cabin. He didn't even bother to grab his bag or the tools he used to lock Emma in. Panic took over. He started the van and sped off, crashing through branches and mud, desperate to disappear. His heart pounded with every turn of the road, his mind racing for a plan. He knew these woods well, but he also knew the police would block the exits. The roads all led to the same few highways that surrounded the forest. If he could reach the northern logging trail, he might have a chance to escape into the hills. He pressed harder on the gas, the old van rattling under the strain. The rear tires slipped in the wet dirt, spraying mud behind him. Back at command headquarters, detectives worked quickly to predict his next move. They mapped out every road, every possible route he could take. They figured he would try to head north toward the old lumber area where abandoned trails twisted for miles. Units were sent to block the roads leading out of the forest. Patrol cars lined the entrances while drones scanned the upper ridges. As daylight broke, one patrol car caught sight of movement on a dirt road near the edge of the forest. It was a dark van, speeding fast, its tires cutting deep grooves into the mud. The officer radioed in the sighting and began pursuit. Moments later, the wail of sirens filled the quiet morning air. The van swerved, bouncing over potholes, while more patrol cars joined the chase from side routes. Carl's plan was falling apart. The sound of sirens behind him grew louder with every passing second. He turned sharply onto a narrow path, hoping to lose them, but the van was too large to maneuver easily. Branches scraped the sides, shattering one of the mirrors. He hit a rock and the van jolted violently, almost throwing him off the seat. His vision blurred for a moment as the vehicle roared forward. The police were closing in fast. The road curved sharply ahead, and before Carl could react, the tires skidded on the slick mud. The van fishtailed, spinning out of control. It slammed into a fallen tree, the impact throwing Carl forward against the steering wheel. Dazed and gasping, he stumbled out of the driver's seat and tried to run, but his legs felt weak. Officers surrounded him from every direction, their flashlights and weapons trained on him. There was nowhere left to go. He fell to his knees, breathing hard, covered in dirt and sweat. The officers moved in, handcuffed him, and pulled him to his feet. He didn't resist. His face was blank, almost calm, as if he still couldn't believe it was over. The forest echoed with the sound of radios and heavy boots as more officers arrived. When they searched the van, they found maps of several other wooded areas marked with circles. Each spot was isolated, far from towns or homes. It looked like Carl had been planning more than one kidnapping. The discovery sent chills through everyone on the scene. As they led him away, the sheriff looked out toward the trees, knowing how close they had come to missing him. If the hunter hadn't reported the smoke, if Emma's watch hadn't sent out that faint signal, Carl Denson might have vanished forever. Instead, his desperate attempt to escape had led him straight into their hands. The days that followed were filled with a mixture of relief and disbelief. Emma Parker was finally safe, but the shock of what had happened lingered over Willow Creek like a shadow. The townspeople gathered outside the hospital, leaving flowers and stuffed animals by the entrance. Reporters camped outside day and night, hoping to catch a glimpse of the little girl who had survived a nightmare. Inside, the hospital room was quiet except for the steady beeping of the monitor beside her bed. Emma slept most of the time, her small hands still clutching the pink watch that had unknowingly led the police to her. Doctors said she was malnourished and dehydrated but strong. They marveled at her resilience, how she had endured days alone in that dark cabin with so little hope. Her mother stayed by her side, holding her hand and whispering to her softly whenever she woke. There were moments when Emma would stare off into space, her eyes unfocused, as if her mind was still trapped in those woods. The trauma was deep, and everyone knew it would take time for her to heal. Meanwhile, Carl Denson was behind bars. His arrest had ended one chapter, but for investigators, the work was far from finished. They spent days combing through his van, collecting evidence, and piecing together his movements. The maps they found had been marked with circles around remote areas across 3 counties. Each one represented a place similar to the cabin where he had kept Emma. Detectives suspected he had spent years planning, moving from one region to another, studying isolated roads and abandoned buildings. He had no fixed address, no relatives nearby, and no stable work record. It was as though he had built his life around not being found. During questioning, Carl remained silent. He didn't ask for a lawyer at first, and when he did speak, his answers were short and emotionless. He never explained why he took Emma. Psychologists later said he showed signs of deep paranoia and detachment, possibly believing that the outside world was his enemy. But whatever his reasoning, the court saw only a man who had stolen a child's innocence and caused untold pain. The trial took months. Evidence was overwhelming: the security footage of the van, the footprints outside the Parker home, the chains and supplies found in the cabin. Emma was too young to testify, but her recorded statement was played in court. Her quiet voice described how she had been taken, the sound of the van engine, and the cold nights in the cabin. The courtroom was silent as the recording played, every person listening with tears in their eyes. When the verdict came, it was unanimous. Carl Denson was found guilty of kidnapping, unlawful imprisonment, and multiple counts of attempted abduction based on his plans for other victims. The judge sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no reaction when the sentence was read. He simply stared ahead, blank and unblinking, as if the words meant nothing. For the people of Willow Creek, the verdict brought a sense of closure. But the fear never completely faded. Parents watched their children more closely, neighbors locked their doors at night, and the once carefree town became a little more cautious. The Parker family tried to rebuild their lives slowly. Emma began therapy, drawing pictures to express what she couldn't say aloud. She started to smile again, though her eyes still held the memory of what she had endured. In time, the community came together to honor her courage. A playground near the elementary school was renamed Emma's Park, built with donations from families all over the county. The ceremony was simple, with children laughing and running in the background, a sound that once again filled Willow Creek with warmth. People often said it was a miracle that she survived, but her mother believed it was something more. It was the tiny details, the pink watch, the smoke seen by a hunter, the persistence of strangers who refused to stop searching, that turned despair into hope. Those details had connected a frightened little girl in the woods to the people who refused to forget her. As the years passed, Emma grew stronger. She no longer feared the woods or the dark. The town remembered her story not as a tale of tragedy, but as a reminder of resilience, proof that even in the quietest places, where evil hides in shadows, the light of determination can still break through.